So when I left the Railway Museum, I said that I had a story for another day. I didn't realize that day was today. I also didn't realize that I was going to end up with 2 giant margaritas after what I just saw. So let's talk about how I got here.
Earlier today, I was geeking out at the train museum with my new besties, Italo and Alfredo.
Yo! Italo. Italo.
You don't need to have seen that video to follow along here, but this one is a direct continuation of that experience. I'll link the previous video in the description. While exploring the train museum, I started to grasp the deep influence that the United Fruit Company and the United States had on Guatemala throughout the last century. From there, I headed to the Holocaust Museum, only to find it closed, much like the train museum was earlier. But, unlike my private tour at the train museum, this closure wasn't for a special event. Instead, the museum was preparing for an evening program featuring music, a performance, and free entry for everyone. I wouldn't normally be this far from my hotel at this hour, but I was curious to see what this museum had to offer. While I was here, I also discovered another museum right across the street, Casa de la Memoria.
I am headed into the Holocaust Museum, which is one of the 2 museums that are right across from each other on this street that I plan on visiting this evening. Gracias. 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 Gracias.
Once inside, I was glad to see how many people were taking advantage of the free entry and extended hours. The museum was filled with visitors exploring the exhibits, and there were designated areas where filming and photography were not allowed. I made sure to be as respectful as possible. The Holocaust Museum is dedicated to educating the public about the Holocaust while promoting tolerance, empathy, and respect for human rights. Opened in 2016, it is the first museum of its kind in Central America, serving as both an educational space and a memorial to those affected by the Holocaust. It stands as a powerful reminder of the consequences of hatred and discrimination. The museum's exhibits provide a detailed look at the history of the Holocaust, the Nazi regime, and the persecution and genocide of Jewish people and other targeted groups during World War II. Through a combination of images, documents, and artifacts, visitors gain a deeper understanding of the horrors of this period. A key focus of the museum is personal stories and testimonies. By sharing accounts from Holocaust survivors, the exhibits help visitors connect with human experiences behind the historical facts. Beyond Holocaust history, the museum also addresses broader themes of human rights, anti-Semitism, and discrimination, encouraging reflection on modern-day social issues and the importance of tolerance. Because the museum covers sensitive and often intense subject matter, there are designated reflective spaces where visitors can pause and process the impact of what they've seen. At its core, the Holocaust Museum's mission is to educate and raise awareness. It's a place for everyone to learn from history and reflect on the importance of standing against hate and prejudice.
All right, I'm leaving the Jewish Museum, or the Holocaust Museum. That was a lot, just like what you would expect of any Holocaust museum. It's very heavy. I don't really know how to say this, but when I walked through the doors, I was expecting something very different. I don't want to sound jaded or like I don't care. What's about to come out of my mouth is really weird. That wasn't the Holocaust that I was expecting. Between my travels to Germany and the Czech Republic, I've been to 3 concentration camps. What happened there was beyond words. 9 million people were murdered. What I saw in that museum is what I would see in a Holocaust museum anywhere. Please don't misunderstand me. There should be a museum like that in every single country, and it should be required that everybody visit. That said, we're in Guatemala, and something happened a little bit closer to home. I am heading into Casa de la Memoria, House of Memories. It's the second museum tonight.
Casa de la Memoria confronts what can only be described as multiple Holocausts, exposing the brutal realities of Guatemala's past with an unflinching gaze. The museum delves into the Spanish conquest of the 16th century, a period marked by forced religious conversion and cultural suppression. When the Spanish arrived, they brought Catholicism with them, imposing it on the Mayan people with ruthless determination. Missionaries from various orders, Dominican, Mercedarian, Franciscan, and others, offered the illusion of choice in religious practice, but true choice did not exist. To resist conversion was to invite death. Those who refused or defied Spanish rule were slaughtered or subjected to unimaginable torture. Their suffering meant to break the spirit of an entire civilization. The conquerors saw the Mayans as less than human, reducing them to subjects of an oppressive regime that sought to erase their traditions. And yet, despite centuries of brutality, the Mayans endured. Fragments of their culture, religion, and language have survived, testaments to resilience in the face of systemic annihilation. Casa de la Memoria also bears witness to another chapter of genocide, the atrocities of the Guatemalan Civil War. The museum honors the memory of the countless people, men, women, and children, who were labeled as communists at the height of the Cold War, an accusation that became a death sentence. The war's worst years saw government-backed forces commit massacres against communities, burning villages, disappearing people, and leaving behind scars that have yet to heal. Here, the names of the missing and the dead are preserved in the most haunting way, a stark reminder of a second Holocaust that, while it impacted all Guatemalans, once again focused on the eradication of the Mayan people. The House of Memory does not allow history to be forgotten. Instead, it forces visitors to confront the weight of those tragedies and recognize the resilience of those who survived. The message outside La Casa de la Memoria reads, "We do not want events of this nature to happen again. We truly believe that for there to be peace in Guatemala, there must first be justice." Well said. I'll shorten it to a cry I've heard and felt all my life as a Black woman in the United States. No justice, no peace.
I am leaving Casa de la Memoria, and that was just as heavy, if not heavier, than the Holocaust Museum. It was something that I really needed to see. I need a drink, a big one.
Sometimes one drink is not enough. Bottoms up as I reflect on the interconnectedness of my experiences today.
The Guatemalan Central Railway Company started building its first railway in 1878. The first train ran in 1880 from the Pacific coastal town of San Jose inland to Esquintla. That's only a small step of about 30 miles, but it was a giant leap for Guatemala. And in 1884, that line was extended further to Guatemala City. In 1908, another line went from Puerto Barrios on the Caribbean coast to Guatemala City. So now Guatemala has its own version of the Transcontinental Railroad. In 1908, the United Fruit Company took over the railway and renamed the railway the International Railways of Central America, or IRCA. United Fruit was a U.S. company that grew fruit, mainly bananas, all over the world. This was part of a massive power grab that led to one U.S. company owning nearly 50% of the land in Guatemala. Take a second to digest that. A United States company was the largest landowner in a country that was not the United States. To boot, that almost 50% included almost all of Guatemala's farmable land. So, a United States company took all of Guatemala's good land and then left the Guatemalans with the scraps of their own land. When I say they owned the land, that means they owned everything on the land too. So in fact, they didn't just own the land. They owned the infrastructure, which means they owned the country. United Fruit was in the business of getting Guatemalan presidents elected, particularly when they ran unopposed. Jorge Ubico was one of those presidents. He had his own train car. Keep in mind, United Fruit didn't just do this in Guatemala or even Latin America. They did this all over the world. So this period under United Fruit was the height of the Guatemalan Railroad, which wasn't really Guatemalan anymore, but I digress. Because United Fruit was, for all intents and purposes, running the country, they shut down any other modes of transport that might have been competition for the railroad. United Fruit's cultivation practices ruined the land, poisoned workers, and destroyed ecosystems. United Fruit was in league with the cooperative government they put in power. They oppressed people as well as stunted the growth and modernization of Guatemala. This is where we get the term Banana Republic. Not the store, but it is a terrible name for a store. In the 1940s, a progressive faction rebelled, took over the government, and overthrew the United Fruit-backed president. A couple of progressive presidents followed, and they tried to make Guatemala just a little bit better for Guatemalans. One of those presidents was Jacobo Arbenz, and he tried to buy Guatemala back from United Fruit. He offered United Fruit a little over $1 million, which is exactly what United Fruit said the land was worth on their tax returns. However, that did not work because now United Fruit was going to claim the land was worth about 20 million. Not liking where this was going, United Fruit also convinced the US government that the progressives were communists. They weren't. At this point, the Cold War had just begun. So out of fear of communism, the United States, through the CIA, had Jacobo Arbenz overthrown. So it turns out that overthrowing a president did not benefit United Fruit. And in fact, because of that and other things that were going on in the world at the time, it aided in their decline. In Guatemala, the overthrow of the president started the longest and bloodiest civil war in Central American history. And United Fruit's efforts to stop a non-existent communist regime, they inspired communist guerrilla bands that were violent and roamed the country. The bands fought against the Guatemalan army. This giant mess that United Fruit created ended up making fruit production difficult. You can't make this stuff up. United Fruit's operations declined and their stock tanked. The Guatemalan government started reclaiming their land in the late 1960s and early 1970s. I wish I could say that United Fruit ceased to exist in any way, shape, or form, but today we simply call them Chiquita. The Guatemalan government renamed the railway system Ferrocarriles de Guatemala, which basically means Guatemalan Railway. However, as Guatemala modernized, a parallel highway was built and the railway just couldn't compete. The railway became obsolete and fell into disrepair. Everything deteriorated until it was finally shut down in 1996, which is actually the same year that the Guatemalan Civil War ended. United Fruit created a bubble that allowed the Guatemalan railway system to last longer, perhaps longer than it would have naturally. When United Fruit dissolved, the bubble popped, and this golden age of transport became history. Guatemala's civil war led to a genocide of the Mayan people by the Guatemalan army. Casa de la Memoria addressed all of it in a very personal way. The Mayans were accused by the government of supporting communist leftist guerrillas. There were massacres, disappearances, and scorched earth policies. Women were violated, and this bloodlust dragged on for more than 3 decades. Hundreds of thousands of people, mostly Mayans, were killed, and over 600 villages were burned to the ground. The clothing the Mayans wore identified their community of origin. This was required by the Spanish and eventually became a part of their identity. They wore their clothes with pride. During the Civil War, clothing that people wore was used to carry out targeted attacks against their community. None of Guatemala's presidents have been held accountable. The country that I am from and very much love propped up the government that did this in the name of fighting communism. We've never been held accountable either. This is called the silent Holocaust because it is largely unacknowledged by the international community. I truly wish I had a better, less unsettling way to wrap up today because it has been a long, long day. Then again, I think people, especially Americans, should sit with discomfort because it means we are acknowledging what happened, and that is literally the least that we can do.